All right, welcome back, everyone, to another enlightening episode of the All Me podcast, where we try to bring you all of the good information and best information on the topic of appearance and performance enhancing substances. And today, I have the wonderful opportunity to speak with Coach Dan Blewett, who not only played the game of baseball, but today is one of the leading voices in the world of coaching. And actually, this is the guy here that got us interested in moving our podcast to video as well, and has helped us out with social media. So Dan, thank you for all those things, and thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, Don, great to be here. It's been a journey, you and I, getting to know each other, doing social media stuff, tech bros in a sense almost.
Absolutely. And thanks for donating the nice little wireless Rode mics that we're using as well. So you've really helped, kind of push us in a different direction on social media. So we can't thank you enough for that. And you might want to throw out your phone number. You might be a social media consultant here before you know it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as we discussed, like you do such a great job in person with your workshops. And as we talked, it's just like, let's try to help you meet people where they're at. And if kids are on TikTok and we know they're getting bad information from, which we'll talk about, a lot of these influencers, maybe they can get good information from your foundation. So
absolutely. Yeah. And that's the best thing that we're trying to do, especially with this podcast, is just be able to provide a little bit more in-depth information on very specific topics relating to appearance and performance enhancing substances. So sort of as our guest today, it's kind of been an interesting how we met and what you do, and, love following you on social media. But if you can kind of, I know you're a baseball guy, just kind of talk about your love for baseball, how you got started, and sort of what you're doing today.
Yeah, so today I have two YouTube channels. I'm the author of 4 books. 3 are on baseball, 1's on mental skills for all sports. And I make my living as Coach Dan on the web. So that's really fun. I do, in-person clinics for baseball and softball. I'm a Positive Coaching Alliance certified trainer. So I've just started doing workshops for them. They are another amazing nonprofit to help coaches and athletes and parents just be more encouraging and have empathy for their athletes and just get the best out of them. So I just try to spread a message that stems from my experience as a baseball player. So I was a walk-on at University of Maryland, Baltimore County, which is a small D1 here in Maryland. Well, I live in DC, but I grew up in Maryland. And my road was tough. I had elbow problems as a young player. I got Tommy John as a redshirt junior in college. I had partially torn that ligament in high school and previously before getting surgery for the first time. I got a chance to play some professional baseball. I played 6 years in independent leagues, and I blew my elbow out a second time in my 3rd season. Sat out my first All-Star game, actually. I was voted to the All-Star game. I would have started it. I was the leading starting pitcher in the league. Had some elbow pain, came out, didn't think it could have been torn again. It was. So my career was hard. And even now, as a 39-year-old, I'm still sort of like unpacking a lot of the just disappointment and the hard times and starting to see my own career still in a new light. But, so I know how a rewarding and wonderful sports can be. I know what it takes to be really great. I know what it takes to put yourself back together. I was Humpty Dumpty having to rehab my elbow all the time. And when I was healthy, quote unquote, I was pitching in pain. Like most of the time I had elbow pain or shoulder pain, and that was normal for me. And I was perfectly happy to grit through that. But, as I see young players go through their journey, I hope they can have an easier road than I did. And so that's where a lot of my messaging on the web comes from, both from the athlete's perspective, coaching perspective, and also from the parent's perspective, because I know, you lost your brother. My father passed away last August, 7 months ago. And, I've seen the end of this journey as an athlete. I've also seen the end of my baseball dad. He was a great supporter. I mean, the best. Yeah. And so I know what the end looks like. And so I've been trying to help parents really understand, like, you might not realize it now, but here's the bigger picture. Yeah. And let's just try to keep a proper perspective. So that's a pretty good overview, I think, of where I'm coming from on the web and kind of what I've been through.
Yeah, and it's good that, not only do you have those experiences, a love for the game that you have, and you're able to sort of pass those experiences along, not just talking about, the fundamentals of baseball and how to field a ground ball and how to hit a ball, that sort of thing, but also talking, you always, especially on your social media that we follow, you're always talking about things outside of just sport and just how do I throw the ball better, how do I hit the ball further, which is always great, right? That comes from experience. But during your playing days, right? Again, on the All Me podcast, we're trying to cover everything appearance and performance enhancing substance, or performance enhancing drugs, if you will. As a former baseball player myself, I saw the use of performance enhancing drugs, and there was certainly a temptation there. Can you give us some of your experience with performance enhancing drugs, what you saw as a player, maybe even talking about, what you're seeing as a coach as well?
Yeah. So in college, I had a teammate or two who all of us sort of suspected. Were like, how did you get so big? Like, you're in the weight room the same as us. Something's happened, right? In pro ball, I had similar experiences, and with opponents too. Like, we'd see a guy, who was 90 to 92 the previous year, on another team, and then one calendar year later, in his early 30s, he's now 94 to 97. It's like, look, there are some good training academies out there. Like, we get it, but those kind of gains at that age, especially when you're like playing full seasons, it's tough, right? So, and of course, like today, I work out, in Gold's Gym here in DC, and I can see the physiques where, like, I observe people, I roll my eyes a lot, but I'm like, that person is not working hard enough to have the physique that they have. Like, I know what hard work looks like, for you being in a college weight room. I've been in a college weight room. There's some hardworking athletes in college, and there's some very demanding strength coaches. I know I had one, and I know what hard work looks like, and it takes a lot to build a significant amount of muscle mass, and you can tell who's got it and who doesn't. But I mean, the only time I was offered, because I'm a person like sometimes, depending on who you tell this to, they either think it's a positive or negative. But like, I've never been in a fist fight, because I don't put myself in positions to be in a fist fight, right? I'm sure I could have found one, right?
Yeah.
But in general, like, I've never been a big drinker. I'm not a big partier. Like, if I bump into someone in a club, I'm like, I'm not trying to, like, hey man, like, and I had teammates just like you probably did, who 10 minutes anywhere you go, it's like, how are you bleeding already? Who punched you? How did this happen? Like, people who always find fights, people who never find fights. And I'm kind of the same way with like drug use and like all that sort of stuff, where like, I'm never in the room with people who are just using drugs. Like, that was never my scene. And so kind of the same thing with steroids. I don't think people would invite me in the room, because I think they know, like, that Dan doesn't want to, this is not Dan. But my 5th year in pro ball, I was getting ready for my second all-star game, and I was having a ton of elbow pain per usual. And the doctor had given me like a oral steroid cream, not like a illegal one. It was called, Toradol, whatever. It was something that like you prescribe, and it was like taking some of the edge off, but like my elbow was still not great, right? And so I was in the outfield, and a teammate came over, and he's like, look, they don't really test in this league. He's like, why don't you just do a cycle of HGH? They don't test for, like, even the major leagues, I don't think they have like good tests for some of these, right?
The blood test.
So he's like, you do one cycle, it'll like heal your body up. He's like, you deserve that. You worked so hard. He's like, and then you'll just like be free again. You'll be like, no one will ever know. And I was like, but dude, I'll know. Like, I'll know. And I've been through Tommy John twice. I've been through so much stuff that was all me. And if I do one thing to jeopardize that, it taints everything that I've ever done. If this were to come out somehow, and I would know. It's like, I've gotten this far not doing this. I was 29 years old at the time. I've been through so much. It's like, I can't risk that. And I don't want this. I'm personally a person who's terrified of putting stuff like that in my body. Like, your hormones, they might not go back to normal. I've heard all the stories. I was a big nutrition head in college. I was learning everything under the sun about strength training and nutrition, because I wanted to get the maximum gains, with an S, not a Z, but I wanted to get as much out of my workouts as I could. So I was learning everything. I was a voracious reader. My strength coach was like giving me every book off his shelf. And I know that when you put steroids and any of these hormones in your body, it can change. Your body's like, oh, we don't need to make testosterone because we're getting it from another source, or we don't need to continue to do this or that. And things might never be the same. And I have no interest in screwing with my plumbing and just like seeing change, like, oh yeah, I did this thing for 6 months and now I'm never going to be the same person again. It's frightening to me.
All right, Dan. Well, thank you for sharing that story. I know, especially as a former athlete myself, there was always the temptation there. And, I'll remember in college, probably about 75% of the guys on my team were using. But even today as an adult, right? I go into the gym and I work out, and you can see even those that are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, you can tell who's on gear, right? Like, I mean, it's just they have this god or goddess like physique, but you can see the acne, you can see sort of the jaundice in the skin. You know, it's obviously very noticeable. But what's hard to get across to young people today, especially boys, right? We're hearing more in high school about, you know, they want to take SARM, selective androgen receptor modulators. You have high school boys coming up after programs. Well, hey, you know, I'm seeing all this stuff from influencers. Like, I want to get on TRT. And it's really hard to explain to them, look, I mean, unless you're sick at this point in your life, I mean, you've got to let your body do what it's going to do, because you have a lot of testosterone in your body right now. You're going to have more as you get into your 20s. And from one of the things you said is, okay, I don't want to mess with the plumbing in my body. And, you know, it's hard to get that point across to young people that once you get on testosterone, right, the odds of you staying on testosterone the rest of your life is very high, because you are going to mess with your natural testosterone production, right? Especially when you start getting into fooling with things like growth hormone, which is extremely expensive, by the way. And, you know, I know you can purchase it on the black market for cheaper, but is it really growth hormone that you're putting in your body, right? So there's always that discussion.
Black market? Ugh, that sounds like a terrible idea.
Exactly, because, I mean, growth hormone's expensive, right? And there's very, very few reasons a doctor would actually prescribe growth hormone. So where are you getting it from, right? So that's a whole nother question that we need to ask ourselves is that what I'm really putting in my body? So we start just introducing our body to all these foreign substances. So, you know, thank you for sharing that. You know, as a coach now, are you able to use some of these stories as a former player, somebody that was in their shoes at that point, you know, to kind of talk about some of the perils of these drugs?
Yeah, well, and I think you've done a good job with your foundation in reminding people that it is a necessary conversation, because, like, you know, I owned a baseball academy for 9 years, and we had our own travel teams, and we had a lot of kids who are, you know, high school age, middle school age in our academy. And it didn't really occur to me that, like, oh, maybe we should just do a once a year, you know, performance enhancer talk to these kids. Because it's like, to me, they just seem so young. Like, you're 14, like you're just running around snot-nosed, nerdy kids. And it's like, it doesn't occur that this could be on their radar, right? And maybe, you know, 10 years ago it wasn't, but now with social media, to your point, like, you scroll through TikTok or Instagram and you're seeing these crazy influencers who are super muscular, who are using performance enhancers, not being honest about it.
Yeah.
And then telling kids that there's shortcuts and that there's all these hacks, and there aren't shortcuts and hacks. And you don't want to take shortcuts and hacks with your own body, because you only get one. And if you start screwing with your hormones, which is what steroids and all these other things do, again, like, now you've like permanently changed the way your body produces hormones and all these different things for the rest of your life. And so, yeah, I think parents and coaches just need, here's the problem is, like, you know, coaches, like in youth sports, there's so many volunteers, and they're already giving their time, and they have to go through all these different, you know, which are good, like certifications to be, you know, safe sport and CPR and all these other things. And now it's like, well, now we have to do this training and this training and this training. And I know it can be a challenge where people feel like it's all piled up, and, like, you know, kids are like, oh, I have to go listen to adults tell me about this and this. And that's why I think, you know, parents just need to be, I think, probably more aware of this. And I do think coaches need to do that. So did I have to talk to my travel team players about this very often? No. Should I have talked to them about it more? Probably. But like, we would talk about, you know, nutrition, because they'd ask, like, should I take protein? Should I take this? Should I take that? And I was always really clear. I'm like, the number one thing you need to do is you need to eat more healthy food. You need to wake up, you need to pack, you know, 2 peanut butter and jellies instead of 1, or 3 instead of 1. You need to bring protein bars, bring this, bring that, focus on whole foods, bring 2 bananas and 2 apples and some peanut butter, like whatever it is. But, like, you have to plan ahead. And so you have to, and these are good skills for kids to learn anyway. I know, like, most kids, mom or dad maybe packs their lunch, or they just buy lunch at school, but take some stock and start to learn to cook just real basic stuff. Those were things like my mom, when she went back to work when we were in like late middle school, I had to like learn just to like, you know, make macaroni and cheese for myself and put a frozen pizza in the oven, just like make little things. And even though I wasn't doing complicated cookery, if it's the right word, it still was
That's what I
like
would refer to
important.
it as, yeah.
It still was like the right it was a good foray into like, oh, it's not that hard to cook food. It's not a thing that only your parents do for you. Like, I can cook things too, right? Here's how, whatever. But kids need to take stock in their own, because like if you get to school and you don't have anything packed, like even if you eat lunch at school in the cafeteria, well, there's so many hours in the day, and 15-year-old boys and girls are voracious. It's like you need more calories. So if you're 130 pounds and you're upset about it, you need to like take some stock. Like, and my college coach was good at giving us sort of hypotheticals. He'd be like, hey, if you knew a college, or say a pro scout is like, hey, I'm going to sign you next year if you get to 195 pounds. You're 180 pounds today, and we think you're really good. But if you get to 195, I'm going to give you a $150,000 signing bonus. He's like, what would you do for $100,000? He's like, would you eat enough? Would you work out enough to put on 15 pounds? Would you, Dan? I'm like, yep, I would. But kids don't have that mindset, but they should, because if you're a junior in college and you really want to play college sports, whatever sport it is, or sophomore in high school, you got to have that mindset. Like, what can I do to, put on more weight? But you have to do it the right way. And that's the problem. And that's where it's the double-edged sword, right? Like, it's, I could go play D1 if I put on 20 pounds. I don't think I can do it healthy. So let me go take a shortcut and get SARMs or some other healthy thing. So it's just having this dialogue with kids where, yeah, if you want to play at higher levels, being bigger and stronger is important, but it's important to do it for the right reasons and do it the right way, because it's going to affect you the rest of your life. And you could be either building healthy habits, learning how to cook, learning about good nutrition, learning how to like just make a plan for yourself, right? If you want to gain 15 pounds, making a plan of like, here's the calories I need to eat, here are the healthy foods I want to eat. Let's make a plan to solve this problem, rather than, I don't think I can do that, so let's just, take a shortcut. That's a fixed mindset, right? It's just like, I can't put on 15 pounds, so I'm going to take a performance enhancer. But a growth mindset, and there's growth mindsets in all aspects of sports, a growth mindset is, I can learn the nutritional things I need to know to plan out healthy meals for myself and pack food and like do all these things so I can meet my goal, right? And that's a great thing for kids to learn. So I think that's a good conversation for parents to have as well.
No, that's great advice. In fact, I think you're one of the first coaches, if not the only coach we've ever had on the podcast, which is wonderful because, as a former player, I know as a former player, I mean, your coaches essentially become like second parents because you leave for school, at 7 a.m. and, you wrap up school 2 or 3, you go to practice, you have practice from like 3 to 6, and then you go home, you might have your parents for another hour or two before you have to go to bed. So I think a lot of this information is essential, not just from the coach's aspect, but also the parent aspect as well. So I hope we're kind of picking up some of these nuggets, because you're talking a lot about nutrition and plans. Just like as adults, we have a plan every day. We got to get our kids out of bed. We got to get them fed. We've got to get to school. Just like your students and your student athletes have to have a plan of, okay, here's how we're going to execute practice so that we can win the game next week, or the game, the tournament that we're getting ready to go through. Everything's around a plan, but I think it's kind of gotten lost in the shuffle over the years of how important nutrition is, and being that link to, peak performance, that you have a lot of these students today that are turning to dietary supplements in lieu of eating food, right? So it's like, well, I'm going to, take creatine, I'm going to get on protein powders, yet 90% of you aren't having breakfast in the morning before you go to school. So your body already is in this calorie deficit, this nutrition deficit, this vitamin deficit. And today, being in high school, it's like, I think most high schools have an average of, let's call it 25 minutes from the time the bell rings to eat to the time you have to be back to class, which is unrealistic to have a student try to stuff food in their face, because they're going to want to visit with their friends. They're getting a break from class. But I want to kind of get your reaction to a story recently that I had at a program I was doing, and how you would, in your position, address other coaches or sort of help provide some recommendations, because we were finished up a program and there was a teacher that was in the classroom with us. And, the teacher essentially was asking me that, if I was familiar with SARMs, selective androgen receptor modulators, which is kind of wild, Dan, because we're hearing a lot more about this in high schools. We're getting lots of questions about it. And I said, sure, I'm very familiar with them. They've been around for 30 years. They're not approved for use in humans. They're not FDA approved. They're not the second coming, if you will, of testosterone and anabolic steroids that don't have any of these side effects. Yeah. And I'd asked, why she had inquired about that. And she said her 16-year-old son is playing on a team, and the coach had recommended to the parents and the kids that they purchase SARMs. So she had gone out and had done that. Now, it's hard to blame coach because, again, there's this lack of education. But what can a coach do to sort of help with some of that responsibility of, let's not recommend something that's not approved for use in humans for a teenage kid? What would be your advice there and sort of your reaction to what this lady had to say?
Well, first, that coach very well could get sued. I mean, he's opened himself up, or he or she has opened himself up to litigation for sure. As someone, I was a certified strength coach. We had our academy. We were really, really careful about what we said about nutrition because we are not licensed nutritionists or dietitians. Yep. And this was something I learned early in my personal trainer certification and just my internships, where it's like, you have to stay in your lane and know your scope of practice. I was a strength coach. I wasn't a physical therapist and I wasn't a nutritionist. So when we were recommending things, it's like, we can't even tell someone you should eat sweet potatoes, because if that person happens to be allergic and like my personal trainer said I need to eat sweet potatoes and they have a reaction, like, I'm getting sued, and I would lose that lawsuit. So we were very, very careful about just being like, here are the categories of things that are healthy. Here are like good general things to do, but we didn't make nutrition plans. We would help kids like understand nutrition, all that sort of stuff. But yeah, I mean, number one, coaches shouldn't be recommending anything except for just like generically whole foods, and they should be bringing in like experts to help them. Now, I realize that's, high school baseball team's not going to be able to bring in a nutritionist to do talks and all this stuff all the time, but just having general guidelines like the FDA creates, or like the food pyramid, which, wasn't maybe the best solution long term. There were a lot of, people had a lot of issues with the food pyramid, but it was a general recommendation, like, here are the things you should be eating. And like when I recommend to kids, it's like, you should be focusing on whole foods, right? Things that don't have an ingredient list, like a banana, right? Like a piece of chicken, like a palm full of walnuts. Like, those are whole foods, right? Focus on those first. And then, yes, you can eat bread, which is not a whole food, but there are different types of bread that have like highly processed bread. And then there's like much more natural, like a loaf of sourdough, whatever. So just like helping them understand what are healthy choices, but like, I don't know what you should be putting in your body specifically. And you don't necessarily know. And because like, even if everything is healthful and you're not going to have an allergic reaction, there's still just like, I can eat a lot more carbs than other people. Yeah. My dad was the same way. We just like, my body burns through them. But like some people, if they like look at a carb, they gain weight, So just like, there's just different nutrition for people's metabolisms are different. But yeah, I mean, the coaches, they have to be really careful. And if anything, they should just be honestly doing a lot more debunking, because the biggest thing is, like you said, like, I know a kid that I'm friends with, and he's not in the weight room consistently, but he's taking protein and creatine. And it's like, that's fine, but those things aren't going to move the needle when you're not doing the foundational thing. Like, he's not eating enough, and he's not, and he's not in the weight room, but he's taking creatine because he heard that's a healthy thing. Now, like, creatine is something that is generally regarded as safe. Is that fine for him? I think so. Like, I've talked with his parents, but it's covering a base that's like on the third tier of if this was a pyramid. Like, what's the foundation? Like, eating a lot of calories that are healthy foods, right? And then part of that foundation is being in the weight room consistently with a good program, with a good strength coach, doing the right things in a safe way. Those are the foundations that most kids just do not cover, right? And if you're eating enough food, and if you're working out on a quality program, your body will respond and you'll get better. But those are like the fundamentals. It's funny, when I go to my public gyms, I mentioned I roll a lot. There's like one thing that like every gym goer has learned, and it's like the least important and actually an unsafe detail. Do you know what it is, Don?
I don't know, but there's tons of different gym stores and things that I see when I'm out there that I roll as well. But
apparently, there's been a memo to all humans that go to the gym that you should not wear shoes when you squat.
I watched so many people squat. I just saw a video on that. I think it was yesterday afternoon. I was kind of updating our TikTok, and it was a gal who just removed her shoes. You don't need your shoes. It positions your feet in the wrong way. And I got to thinking, I'm like, dude, those 45-pound plates are heavy. If one falls over and lands on your toe, your foot, you fracture it, there's not much they can do for that, and you're down for a little bit.
Even even power lifters, like some of the strongest people in the you go to like West Side Barbell, they're not lifting in bare feet. They're lifting in like flat soled shoes. It's such a weird thing because it's true that like your feet will get stronger if they're like more directly pressed. You don't want to wear like moon shoes, like super cushy running shoes, because they kind of smush. But here's the thing: when you're squatting, you're supposed to be putting pressure outward against the floor. You push your knees out and you push outward on your feet. That's how you do a good squat, to keep your knees in line with your toes and to activate more of your lateral hips. So I watch people take their shoes off with their socks, stand on a wooden, Olympic platform. And I'm like, if you're pushing out with your feet in slippery socks on wood, you're gonna like, your knee's gonna cave in. I'm scared for these people. I'm not gonna go tell them, because no one wants advice from anyone else, right? I'm not that guy. But it's like, somehow everyone has this memo, and it's a very unsafe thing that they're doing. If you're squatting in socks on a wooden platform, like, that's a slip risk. I can't believe that they do that and feel comfortable. But my point is just that this is like another one of those things. It's like they haven't learned to squat properly, but they did somehow learn that they should not wear shoes. It's like, where do we get this info that's like just unimportant details that they always remember, or they're looking for a shortcut and they don't get the big picture details that are actually really important? And that's the same thing with nutrition.
Yeah, and I think the hard part, the thing that we're dealing with today is social media. I mean, as you know, it's a very, very powerful tool. People are on it. People are using it. They're consuming information. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of great information on social media, and some of these influencers that are even pushing some of these performance enhancing drugs, they have great advice on nutrition and how to eat and how to do it on a budget. The sad part is, I mean, when you have a physique like some of these influencers do, they know that was not obtainable without the use of drugs. They know that. Our kids are not stupid. In fact, I mean, I think kids today have access to way more information than we did. I mean, it's like you date yourself, but you remember having like the encyclopedias at your house, right? Where now, I mean, you can search something on your phone and get a response within seconds, or, one of these AI things, just ask them and they'll give you the information, right? Where we had to go in and figure out what encyclopedia to go to even read more about it. And by that time, some of the information could be dated as well. But from like a coach's standpoint, when, I know coaches are busy, right? Because a lot of the coaches in high school, they might be teaching class, or they might be working another job as like a CPA, and then they're having to leave and then go coach. And it's like, well, I don't have time to get into some of this information with the kids, or I don't have the tools or the resources, maybe I don't know much about performance enhancing drugs, or I don't know, Dan, much about, nutrition. It's great that, you had the time to read and do all this. When as me as a coach who's also working full time, when do I have the time to sit and talk with my athletes about some of this important information? How would you respond to something like that?
Yeah, I mean, if it was me, it'd be downtime. So like, tournament format is the big format these days, obviously, with any youth sports pretty much. So there's a lot of downtime between games in the dugout, or, if it's not baseball or softball, not a dugout, but, there's a lot of downtime between games, team meals, just, killing time after practice or before practice. So I think you just try to utilize some of the downtime. And like you said earlier, coaches they're just one of the biggest influences. I mean, I've had so many great coaches in my life that were just like huge male role models and mentors, and I'm so thankful for that. And when they spoke, it like spoke volumes, and I listened, right? So if it was disinformation, it could have like really changed my path. But I think the big thing coaches need to be plugged into is their messaging, when they're saying you need to be bigger, faster, and stronger, but they don't give any instruction on how to do that. And if you have a 15-year-old kid who's like, I just don't want to be invisible anymore. I'm 5'10" and I'm 128 pounds. And coach says I have to get bigger and faster, stronger. I feel invisible. I want to fix this as fast as I can. And I think I eat a lot, and I think I'm working hard in the gym, but no one's really helping me. So what do I do? And then they take a shortcut, because they heard on the web that there is a shortcut, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if coaches are more just like, hey, I realize it's not that easy to put on weight. Let's all talk about what are the stepping stones to reaching any of your goals, right? And just having a plan for people. And one of the things they talk about is called wise feedback. And wise feedback is keeping high standards for athletes, but also helping them and giving them the resources. So rather than saying, hey, we need you to be at 165 pounds next year. You're 150 pounds here as a sophomore. We need you to be at 165 pounds next year. Now, that's what we need from you. Like, we need more power and bat speed or whatever.
Yeah.
this is a baseball example, but here's how we're going to help you get there. We're going to have our strength coach is going to, be available to you. If you want an extra day in the gym, we think that's fine. We're going to help you. We'd like you to keep a food diary so we can help you with your stuff. So it's not just like saying, we need you to be this, but also saying, we think you can get here. And for a lot of kids, putting on 10 pounds in a year is like a reasonable goal if they're working hard and they're growing and they're eating. But the question is, do you give them these targets as a coach and then just give them no guidance? Or do you say, we think you can be at 165 pounds. Here's how we're going to support you in doing that. But you've got to put in a lot of hard work and you've got to put in a lot of effort planning this stuff out, waking up, packing lunch to your college classes in the morning. A story that I still remember that changed my perspective on all this was I was reading the website T Nation, which was a good resource for me at the time. And Dr. John Berardi, who owns the company Precision Nutrition, he's really, as far as I can tell, a tremendous person and also a tremendous nutritionist. He explained how he went from like 130 pounds to competing in bodybuilding at like 175 or 180. And he said that his motto was like, if I'm not chewing, I'm not growing. And he said that he took to all of his, I think it was college classes, he took a gallon jug of water with like maybe like 4 or 5 scoops of whey protein in it. So like, not a crazy performance enhancer, but just like whey protein diluted in some water. And he brought a 6-pack of bagels that you'd buy at the grocery store with peanut butter smeared between all 6. So he said it was not fun, but he sat in class and he just chewed, he bit a bagel and he swigged it down with protein water, and he chewed and he swigged and he chewed and he swigged. And every day it was like his way to get another like 2,500 calories. And he was working super hard in the gym, but he's like, if I'm doing everything I can in the weight room, but if I'm not chewing, I'm not growing. And that was his thing. And he didn't take a shortcut, and it was hard. And that was a story that changed me, because when I was like, I want to get bigger and I want to get stronger, I thought about that story. And I was like, but to your point earlier, that could be a story of like, oh, if you want to get bigger and stronger, you got to take this, right? It could be the other. So like the stories are super important and powerful. And I was lucky that I tuned into the right people and was also turned on to certain people, because I got turned on to John Berardi's writing and some of his content by a coach who's like, this is a reputable person to listen to. Go listen to him. And I was like, great. I don't have to vet him. He's vetted him. I trust you. So that stuff is important too. And so when a coach doesn't know what they're talking about and like, oh, I've heard this, you should take it, that's where you get in trouble.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things you had mentioned that we talk about in all our programs is, the whole term, especially for athletes, right? It's get bigger, stronger, faster. But I mean, I think there's also those out there that have zero desire to compete in sports. It's like, maybe, you need to lose weight, or you shouldn't eat that, or, you're skinny, you need to put on some pounds, right? And words are powerful. And there, there's that famous quote, you might not remember what somebody said, but you certainly remember how they made you feel. Right. And these words being that powerful. I mean, it's been since the beginning of time, probably since the gladiators. I mean, it's, you got to get bigger, stronger, faster, which I understand. I think the problem is today, Dan, when you tell a young person, just like Taylor was told at the time, Taylor was 6'1", 6'2", 180 pounds, already a pretty big kid. You need to get bigger, stronger, and faster. Well, the problem was half the kids on Taylor's team were using steroids to achieve those goals. So he quickly figured out, okay, well, I know how my buddies are doing it. I'm going to hop on this stuff too. I think in today's world, with the ease of access to information, we've got to be really careful, especially as an influencer, right? Whether that's a coach, a parent, an aunt, uncle, whoever it might be, with providing, or saying some of these things to these kids without sitting down, like you said, and having a plan to help them. So whether it's I want to squat more or I want to put on these 10 pounds, okay, that's great. I agree with you. We need to put some weight on. How can I help you achieve those goals? Who can I put you in touch with? Because again, you don't have to be as knowledgeable as you are as a coach and as well-rounded. Like maybe that's information that is very difficult for you to digest, or you don't have time to learn more about nutrition. But as an adult, you can pick up the phone and make some calls or send some emails to connect that young person to get them the resources they need.
Yeah. And as a coach, and that's what I think can be really frustrating and hard as a coach, is like, you don't have time to be an expert in everything. Right. And that was often a frustration for me as a baseball academy owner, where we did strength training and we did skill development for baseball and softball. But, sometimes we would lose kids, like the high school coach would be like, you have to come do our workouts, but then they wouldn't even show up and supervise. It's like, you just want control, but you don't want to actually put a plan together for kids. Like, so kids just need guidance, right? And the problem is like, we don't expect a high school, sport coach, any sport, who also is probably a full-time teacher, right? We don't expect you to also be a strength coach. We don't expect you to also be a dietitian. Like, those are a lot of hats to wear. So that's where you just need to abdicate and say, like, all right, well, let me find someone who can help me figure out what the right things are to say to my kids about nutrition, or the right things to do for strength training. Like, just find a strength coach, get a program, put it in place, rather than trying to be an expert in everything. Because as you mentioned, like, it's just tough to be knowledgeable on everything.
Yeah, there's a lot of great resources out there that I'll be sure to put down in the show notes, kind of below this video, or if you're listening to the podcast on the audio version, you can open up your phone and kind of log in and see some of these notes. We'll link out to some of Dan's videos, because I know, Dan, you do a good job of not just talking about, the fundamentals of sport, but I know it's also important to you to talk about some of these other things, whether it's nutrition or dietary supplements, energy drinks, whatever the case might be, because you're hearing some of this stuff from these young people. So we'll be able to link out to your stuff as well, so they can come tune into some of these videos. But as a coach, sort of in your role, what are you hearing from some of the kids with regards to supplements or SARMs or PEDs? Are you hearing any chatter amongst the kids? Like, when they're out on the field, are they discussing some of this stuff? Sort of like you were approached in the outfield, like, hey man, if you got on GH, it could really change your life. Are you hearing any of this stuff?
I'm not day to day with young people as much as I used to be, but what I'll tell you is that a lot of it just hides in group chats and in, digital realms, where they're passing, they're sending, hey, check out this video. Hey, check out this influencer, check out this. And it just lives in the shadows and Snapchat or WhatsApp or whatever. And that's where the disinformation can spread so fast. And that's what's unfortunate, because there's no intervening force to say, oh no, that's actually not true, or oh no, that's actually super unhealthy for you.
Yeah.
And and they're not, you don't get both sides of the argument when you're on the web. You're right.
Yeah.
It's not like no 13-year-old's like, oh, look at this, we should take this thing, and someone's like, well, maybe that's not healthy, maybe you should take this instead. Like, that doesn't happen, right? So they're just like, oh cool, dude's got huge biceps. So yeah, I don't know, it's a tough thing. And I think the big picture with the web and the digital footprint of everyone is just like, there needs to be balance of voices, and there also needs to be balance of voices that actually like look the part. Because is some skinny, world-class doctor in a suit gonna hold the same weight as some jacked steroid guy talking about getting bigger and stronger?
You're right.
The doctor is like a world expert perhaps on whatever, there's hypothetical, but they're not going to hold the same weight, because the kid's like, I don't want to look like you. I don't look like that guy. Like, I don't care how many degrees you have. I don't care that you, speak at Yale. I want to look like that guy. So he's the one and he's like younger and like looks, you got to look the part, right? Like, and I'm 39. So like, I know that I need to still look the part, right? Like, this is my Coach Dan costume, the black hat, the black t-shirt. And that matters, right? It matters that kids are like, hey, Dan looks, he was a player and he looks the part. Like, okay, I'll listen to him, right? So we just need voices in the industry, whether that's, deputizing some of you out there listening to make your own podcast, or just start making content on any platform. But kids need good role models more than anything. And right now, unfortunately, a lot of bad role models get a lot of traction by saying controversial things and having controversial physiques, unfortunately,
No, you're absolutely right. And that's what, again, the kids are gravitating to, right? So it's super important that, we constantly try to at least give them some information, talk about it. Here's Shores, again, I don't want to name any of the specific influencers out there, but, while they are giving good information about nutrition and how to shop on a budget and making sure you're hitting your macros, it's very clear to that young person that you're obviously on some sort of performance enhancing drug, right? So, we need to be talking about some of the side effects and perils that these things bring. So one of the things, Dan, I know you've tuned into our podcast and you've watched. One of the things that we tried to do, like, for example, we tried to give the audience a perspective of somebody that's actually used the drugs, right? And also having that doctor come in and talk about some of the side effects. So, for example, we were getting a lot of questions from young people in our programs or through our website or social media about Tren, hashtag Tren, TREN, which is short for Trenbolone, a drug not approved for use in humans. But it's a super powerful anabolic, right? That's used in the bodybuilding world to help develop muscle. Extremely dangerous, right? Lot of severe side effects. So not only did we have somebody that was an expert on trend, right, that came on our podcast and talked about it, but it was also important for us to talk to a former user, right? Somebody that's actually put these drugs in their body, right? So it's not just a textbook telling me, it's actually what's happened in my body. And then recently we were getting, Dan, which is pretty wild, from high school girls, questions about Anavar and clenbuterol and how it burns fat and it can rip me up and that sort of thing. So not only did we have a former bodybuilder who ran these drugs through her body and still has some of the issues today, but we also had a doctor who is also a fitness competitor that works with women taking these drugs. So you get the two different perspectives, right? So I think to your point, am I going to listen to the dude in a lab coat, although he's skinny, this and that, or the guy over here that's super ripped with these big biceps? I'd probably want to pay attention to do with the biceps. So, how do we provide information from both sides, and which we believe is super important?
Yeah, and I think there's also just a crisis with young men right now, not to single out young men, because young men and women, like we know young women are using more than they ever have in the past, which is frightening. Those statistics are climbing. But with young men, like they're increasingly sort of like not allowed to speak at the table sometimes and struggling to figure out what they do control in this world. And like, they don't know what masculinity is, right? There's a lot of conflicting reports. There's a big political issue. Like the Democrats say one thing, the Republicans say another thing about masculinity. And, it's just, then they're like, well, I know if I can do anything right, maybe I can be bigger and stronger. Maybe I can have muscles.
Yeah.
Like maybe I can look like this and then I can be a real man. And there's just it's just a really complicated time, I think, to be a young person in general. And I think it's complicated to be a young man. I think the one thing parents can do is when your kid comes to you and says, hey, will you buy me this protein, or will you buy me this thing? I think make sure before you just go, yeah, sure, like that's good. Or no, we're not spending money on that. Make sure the light bulb goes off and you say, why do they want this, and see if you can have a real honest discussion or an ongoing discussion and figure out, what are they feeling? Are they feeling, I'm not going to reach my sports goals, I'm this skinny invisible wimp in school and I want to feel like a more masculine person because some influencers are saying that I'm not masculine unless I'm muscly and I'm big and strong? Or try to figure out what the root is, because I think this is a really scary time and you want to know what, when a kid asks that I want this or I want this, the question should be, okay, what rabbit hole have you been down? And hopefully you're not all the way at the bottom of it yet, but like, where are you going on the web that's led you to wanting this supplement and why? I think it's a really important thing for parents to be plugged into when that time comes, because it will come if your kid's involved in sports, and even if they're not involved in sports.
It's great advice, because the one thing I think, as a new parent, that you can do is sit down and do the research with your kids. Because I've had friends, that have teenage kids that are in the world of professional sports. They're in the world of strength conditioning or nutritionists, and they have no idea what their kids are consuming on YouTube and TikTok. And I've encouraged them as professionals, sit down with your kids and enjoy what it is that they enjoy, just like you would with your significant other. And you're going to quickly see, because I remember getting a couple texts back like, wow, okay, like I had no idea this was the type of information they were consuming. And here you are sitting in your role, right, as somebody that's training professional athletes. Like, you really need to get an understanding on that. So when it comes to advice, Dan, what I want to do is, I'd be really interested to see is, what does Coach Dan what would Coach Dan want young player Dan to know as, a middle school or high school, not just an athlete, but also a student, that might have helped you, whether it was in your career of sports or academia or what have you? What advice would you go back and give young Dan that you think might have been, helped you in your life?
I'm a person that doesn't have a lot of, I don't have many regrets, because I was a philosophy major, so not to go on a rabbit hole, but I heavily believe in determinism. So I kind of believe that I'm a little bit of a robot and I just am who I've gotten here the only way that I could have gotten here. That aside, I think I did a lot of things right, which I'm really thankful for, because I had good role models. I had great parents. I had great coaches. I had good resources. I always had sort of like I kind of referred to it in one of my books as like the right lantern keeper at the right point in my journey to show me the next road that I couldn't necessarily see. So for me, I don't know that I would do anything differently weight training wise or nutritionally or training wise. I worked really hard and I did a lot of research because I didn't have a pitching coach in college. So I had to kind of become my own pitching coach. And so I consumed tons of books and, there wasn't a lot of video content on the web at the time.
Yep.
But I think the main thing for me was more emotional. I think if I go back, I would spend more time putting myself out there socially with my teammates rather than just being like I didn't know how to work the social scene in college. I just really didn't. I was like so focused on baseball, but also just like a little socially awkward. But I didn't know how to go to like the parties that my teammates were going to, the other teams were going to. And I could have gone and just like not drank because I didn't want to drink. I could have though. And I could have like met friends. And I didn't know how to do that. And I wish if I would go back, I'd push myself to just be part of the gang a little more in a good way.
Yeah.
Yep. And I think I also would have just been less hard on myself and a little less obsessive. And in one hand, I was good at that. Like, I'm not a person that set a lot of goals. Like, I wanted to throw 90 miles per hour. And when I was a kid, I wanted to throw 106 miles an hour. I wrote that on a Post-it note and I put it in my bed. I'm like, 100 is an arbitrary number. I'm going to throw 106. Ironically, humans do throw 106 now, which is wild. But I didn't get there. But
I was getting ready to ask you. The big question is, did you ever hit that 106?
No, 94 is my highest. But I didn't set tons of goals. I was more just focused on I made a plan of like, what can I do today? And if I worked really hard in the weight room, I ate all the right things. I was just like, I did everything I could today. So wherever I'm going, this is getting me there, right? Yeah. I just feel like I didn't need to like see this monument on the hill. I was fine just going through the fog as long as I was like charging through it, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
but
that makes perfect sense.
But I was also pretty obsessed with my like velocity numbers as a pitcher. And I spent a lot of time worrying, like, oh, I didn't throw as hard this day. Am I something wrong? There was just like a lot of obsessiveness. And I see that with players now and on lots of different sports and with their weight and with their strength training numbers, where it's like everything could be tracked. There's a huge focus on metrics. Yes. And it's like, oh, I didn't lift as much today. And they're all chewed up about it. And it's like, this is a process. There are so many ups and downs. Weightlifters talk about this. And I knew this, like, maybe your best squat is 425. And today you feel great, but you only could put up 385. Like that happens. There's just like a band of like, you're going to be plus or minus your top 5% of what you can do on a given day. And your velocity fluctuates. If you're a sprinter, your sprint times will fluctuate. My dad was an amazing champion runner. Some days he would run a 409 mile in competition. The next day he'd run a 404. The next day he'd run a 414. And it's like, what's the difference? It's like track conditions. It's like, it's all sorts of little variables. And that's hard to make sense of as a young person sometimes. And I had a hard time just feeling like, am I doing this right? Do I need to fix something? And it's like all the time that can really wear you out emotionally. So if I go back, I would just I'd try to be a little more social and push myself out of my comfort zone there. And, because you don't get that time back, right? Like you want to enjoy your teammates. And even if you're like really striving hard to be excellent at your sport, which I always was, things you really remember are like the laughs in the dugout, the laughs on the bus, like all that fun stuff, and the relationships you make. And I've made tons of great relationships, but it was just a little bit of a journey for me, figuring out how to be myself and also be as social as maybe like some of the others when I was kind of an introverted kid. So
the best way you can grow, right, is when you're uncomfortable. That's how we learn. That's how we grow.
Yeah.
Well, Dan, no, this has been awesome, man. Thank you for, all of your knowledge, all the inspiration that you share and information, especially from somebody that was not just a player that had their struggles, but is now trying to coach kids and parents and sort of share that information and not just so focused on, how do I get my velocity to 106, right? There's a lot of things even today for some of the guys that throw that hard, right, that it takes to get there. But before I let you go, anybody that's tuned into the podcast knows that, we try to end our podcast a little bit of fun, and we call it our curveball round. So I don't know if you were a good hitter or not, but I know the curveball can sometimes be very difficult to hit. And I've got 3 questions that I'm going to ask you. And what I'm going to ask you to do is just the first thing that pops into your mind, go ahead and answer it that way. Some of it will have to do a little bit with baseball, but some of the other questions are just kind of random. You let me know when you're ready, and I'll throw the first question at you.
All right. I'm ready.
All right, here we go. So looking back when you were younger, What was your silliest fear?
Silliest fear? It's a hard one.
I can tell you when I was little, I don't know why. Like when I would jump into the pool, I always thought I was going to get sucked down the drain.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
I was always afraid of the drain. I'm like, dude, the hole's about, this big. Like I'm not going to fit in there anyway. But
maybe that like a asteroid would collide with the Earth and we'd be gone. I don't know. I definitely thought about that one once in a while. More of like from an awe standpoint. Like that would be crazy.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Hopefully it would happen fast. All right. So if you were playing in the big leagues today, what would your walk-up song be or your walkout song?
I think so. Walkout song theory, it's either for you to get you pumped up or it should be like a ultra crowd pleaser to get the crowd really engaged. I would go the crowd pleaser way. And if I had more time to prepare, I'd probably have something better. But I think I would go with Werewolves in London by Warren Zevon, because at about the 40-minute mark, the chorus is like, Werewolves London.
Yeah.
And if it gets there while you're still warming up, the crowd starts to howl, which is pretty fun. So that was my walkout song one year, and it was cool to hear people like howling.
Never thought about that perspective from, getting the crowd fired up. It was always, okay, how do I get me fired up? Mm-hmm. So here's my last question for you. If aliens landed on Earth today, who would you recommend that they speak to?
It's a good question. Probably a woman, to be quite honest.
I couldn't figure out an answer to this because I was like, first of all, I would want to talk to them and get to know them and become friends with them. Maybe they would invite me on the ship as long as nothing weird would happen like you see in the movies.
Oh, I'm not going on that ship. Were you a Twilight Zone watcher as a kid?
No, I'm not. But there was a movie where a dude got, I remember seeing him. He got sucked up by the aliens and got probed and all. I don't want any of that. I just want to go teach me about where you're from.
There was an episode of the Twilight Zone called To Serve Man, and these aliens came down and they seemed super nice. And they had this book, this big black book. And these like scientists were trying to decode their language because they're like, a couple of people were like, I don't trust these aliens. And the plot twist at the end, because I love the original Twilight Zone so much, was the book was, it's a cookbook. And all the people who were going up on their ship to like take them to this amazing planet, they were actually like taking them somewhere to like cook them and eat them. So To Serve Man.
Yeah.
Twilight Zone's the best. The first person that comes to mind is Barack Obama. I think he's a really kind man. I think he's really thoughtful. I think he was a good president. This isn't a political statement. He pops into my mind. I think he's a good steward I think he'd be a good steward of humanity. So yeah, I'll go with him.
You could hear his voice in your head as he addresses the alien. It just that recognizable speech voice. Well, Dan, no, thank you again for joining us today. We really appreciate everything that you've shared with us. And I know, our listeners will certainly get something out of this.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
You bet.